For the last 8 months, I told myself I was doing the right thing. I kept quiet. I kept my head down. I watched my own home turn into something I didn't recognize. And I said nothing. They had no idea I'd already been to see my attorney. My name is not important. What matters is this. I am 64 years old. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer. I designed bridges, drainage systems, the kind of infrastructure that holds a city together underground where nobody ever sees it. I know how to be patient. I know how to build things that last. And I know, better than most, that when a foundation is compromised, you don't patch over it, you tear it out and start again. My wife Carol passed away 3 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. We had 8 months from diagnosis to the end. And I'd give anything, every bridge I ever built, every dollar I ever earned, to have 8 more months with her. She was the one who softened every hard edge in this family. She was the reason our son came home for holidays without being asked. She was the glue. After she died, it was just me in the house. 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, a kitchen she picked every fixture in. I'm not a man who decorates, so the house still looks like Carol. Her curtains, her dish towels, the little ceramic owl she kept on the windowsill above the sink. I never moved any of it. My son. I'll call him my son because that's all he is to me in the story. Nothing more specific than that. Came to me about a year after Carol passed. He was 32. He'd been living in an apartment across town with his girlfriend, a woman I'd met maybe 4 or 5 times at that point. She was polite enough at family dinners, laughed at the right moments, complimented Carol's recipes even though Carol was already gone, and I was the one who'd made the food. He sat across from me at the kitchen table and said he wanted to move in. Save money. They were planning to get married. It would just be temporary. A year, maybe 2, while they got on their feet. I said yes. Of course I said yes. He's my son. They moved in that October. I gave them the master bedroom because it had the ensuite bathroom, and I thought, she's going to be my daughter-in-law. She'll want the privacy. I moved into the second bedroom down the hall. It had always been the guest room. Carol had decorated it with blue and white striped wallpaper that she picked out in 1998. I slept fine in there. I didn't mind. The first few months were ordinary. I cooked most nights. My son ate whatever I made and said thank you like I'd raised him to say. His girlfriend, I'll call her my daughter-in-law, because by spring they were married, a small courthouse thing I wasn't invited to plan but was invited to attend. She ate whatever I made too, though she started making comments. Small ones at first. Just enough salt. Did I use butter or oil? Is there a way to make this a little lighter? I adjusted. I'm not a man who argues over seasoning. What I did notice was how quickly the house started to feel like it belonged to them. She rearranged the living room furniture within 3 months of moving in. I came downstairs one Saturday morning and the couch was against a different wall. Carol's armchair was pushed into the corner, and there was a new rug on the floor that I'd never seen before. I didn't say anything. I told myself it was their home, too. She replaced the dish towels in the kitchen. I found Carol's in a box under the sink. When I asked about it, she said they were worn out, which was true, but she hadn't asked. She'd just done it. I found the ceramic owl in a drawer. I put it back on the windowsill. The next week, it was in the drawer again. I stopped putting it back after that. I moved it to my bedroom instead. By summer, about 8 months after they'd moved in, the tone had shifted in a way I couldn't quite name at first. My daughter-in-law had stopped being polite in the way that requires effort. She'd moved into a different kind of politeness. The kind that is really just management. She managed me. She managed what I cooked and when I used the washing machine and how long I spent in the main bathroom, even though I had my own bathroom off my bedroom. She'd knock on my bedroom door to tell me things. Not ask. Tell. The TV's too loud. We're having people over Saturday. Can you make yourself scarce? I need you to move your car. It's in the way. My son never said these things directly. He'd follow up afterward with a softer version. Hey, Dad, she just meant, or, look, it's not a big deal. She just prefers. I want to be honest with you about something. There were moments during those months when I wondered if I was the problem. I'm not an easy man to live with, probably. I'm quiet. I keep to my routines. I eat breakfast at the same time every day, and I get irritated when someone's moved my coffee mug. Carol used to call me a machine, but she said it with affection. Maybe without Carol there to translate me, I came across differently. So I gave them the benefit of the doubt. Month after month, I gave them the benefit of the doubt. The conversation that changed everything happened on a Thursday evening in September. I was in the kitchen cleaning up after dinner. I had cooked, as usual, when my daughter-in-law came in and leaned against the counter. She had a specific way of standing when she was about to say something she'd already decided. Arms crossed, weight shifted back, chin up slightly. I'd learned to recognize it. She told me they were thinking about starting a family. I said that was wonderful. I meant it. She said that when that happened, they were going to need more space. I said the house had 4 bedrooms, so space didn't seem like it would be an issue. She looked at me then in a way I've thought about many times since. Not unkind, exactly. More like the way you'd look at a piece of furniture you're deciding whether to move or get rid of. She said they'd want the baby close to their room. In the room right next to theirs. Which was my room. I waited for the question she wasn't asking. She asked it. She said she thought it might be time for me to think about whether the basement might work better for me. More privacy, she said. Like a separate apartment. My son had already looked into finishing it out a little. Putting in a proper bed frame. A space heater. I stood there with a dish towel in my hand, and I looked at her and I thought, this is my house. I paid for this house. My name is on the deed. Carol is still on that windowsill in a little ceramic owl that you keep putting in a drawer. I said I'd think about it. My son came to me later that night. He sat on the edge of my bed, the guest room bed with Carol's blue and white wallpaper, and he told me it would just be temporary. He said it like he believed it. Maybe he did. He said the basement would be private. I'd have my own space. It was just until they got settled with the baby and figured things out. He said, Dad, it would really mean a lot to her. I looked at my son and I thought about the day he was born. I'd held him in that hospital, and I had been so certain of everything. Who he would be. Who I would be to him. How none of that could ever really be taken away. I said, okay. I moved my things to the basement that weekend. A twin bed, a lamp, my clothes in 2 duffel bags, Carol's ceramic owl on the shelf next to the water heater. My son helped me carry the boxes down without making eye contact. I want you to understand what the basement was like. Unfinished concrete floors, a single small window near the ceiling that looked out at the garden at ground level. I could see people's feet walking past. The space heater my son had bought worked well enough, but the rooms smelled like cold cement and old cardboard. There was a bathroom down there, a utility bathroom they'd added years ago when Carol and I first bought the house, with a toilet and a narrow shower stall. I lay in that twin bed the first night and I thought, I have a master's degree. I spent 30 years building things that will outlast me by centuries. I raised a child in this house, and I am sleeping on a cot next to a water heater because my son's wife wants the room next to hers. But here is what I did not do. I did not feel sorry for myself for long. I am an engineer. When something isn't working, you don't sit in the dark cursing the structure. You figure out what's failing and you address it. 2 days after I moved to the basement, I called my attorney. His name is not important either, but he has handled my affairs for 20 years, and he is not a man who softens things unnecessarily. I told him everything. He was quiet for a moment and then he said, whose name is on the deed? I said, mine. He said, only yours? I said, mine and my late wife's estate, which I am the sole executor of. He said, then I think you already know what to do. We talked for an hour. I didn't commit to anything that day, but I started to understand the shape of the situation more clearly. My house. My deed. No rental agreement. No legal tenancy. No formal arrangement of any kind. Because you don't make formal arrangements with your son. Over the following weeks, I began paying closer attention to things I'd been ignoring. I noticed that my daughter-in-law had put her name on a package delivery account that used my address. I noticed that she had been selling things online, furniture, household items, and that some of what she was selling I recognized. A set of serving dishes that had been my mother's, a lamp from the living room that Carol had brought back from a trip to Vermont. I went through the house one afternoon when both of them were out, and I cataloged what was missing. There was more than I'd realized. I also noticed she'd had several phone conversations she clearly didn't know I could hear from the basement. The utility room had an old laundry chute that ran up to the hallway closet on the main floor, and sound traveled down it with surprising clarity. I'm not proud of this. I wasn't intentionally listening. But the first time I heard her voice through that chute, I stopped moving and I paid attention. She was talking to someone I didn't know. The conversation was about money, specifically about what the house would sell for in the current market. She was talking about timing, about how much they could clear after end. She paused here, in a way that made the air feel very still. After everything was sorted. I stood very still next to the water heater in my concrete room, and I thought about that phrase. After everything was sorted, the next day I went to a hardware store and bought a small digital recorder. Nothing sophisticated. I put it in my jacket pocket. I want to be clear, I did not entrap anyone. I did not set a scene or manufacture a confrontation. I simply began carrying the recorder when I was in the common areas of my own house, which is my legal right in my state. Most days, it recorded nothing except the refrigerator running and the television upstairs. But about 3 weeks in, I was in the kitchen making coffee early on a Sunday morning when my daughter-in-law came downstairs and started a conversation she clearly thought was private. She'd been talking to her sister. I'd heard part of that call through the laundry chute the night before. The sister had apparently pushed back on whatever was being planned, and my daughter-in-law was now venting. Half to herself, half into her phone, which she was still holding. About how long this was taking. How she hadn't expected the old man to be so passive. How once the baby came, it would be much easier to formalize things. How her name wasn't on anything yet. But there were ways around that. She said, clearly and without ambiguity, that she had no intention of staying in this arrangement long term, that she'd already talked to someone about property law, that my son did whatever she told him and always had. I stood in the doorway of the kitchen holding my coffee cup, and she looked up and saw me and stopped talking. I said good morning. She said good morning. She said good morning. I poured my coffee and went back downstairs. That afternoon I sent the recording to my attorney. What happened next took about 6 weeks, and it was not dramatic. There was no shouting. There was no confrontation at the dinner table. The law does not work like that. It works slowly. And then all at once. My attorney advised me that as the sole owner of the property with no rental agreement in place, I had the right to issue a notice to vacate, given the circumstances, the recorded conversation, the missing property, the documented pattern. He also advised that the missing items constituted grounds for a civil claim. He was straightforward about what could be recovered and what couldn't. We were realistic. I chose a Tuesday evening. I asked my son to sit with me at the kitchen table. Just him. I told my daughter-in-law I needed to speak with my son privately, which was the first time I had asked anything of her, and she raised her eyebrows and left the room. I placed my phone on the table with the recording cued. I said, I need you to listen to something. I watched my son's face while he listened. I'm his father. I've been watching his face since the day he was born. I saw the moment it changed. Not the moment he heard the words, but the moment he believed them. He'd known something was wrong. He'd let himself not know it. And now he couldn't unknow it. When it finished, he sat there a long time without speaking. He said, "How long have you known?" I said, "Long enough." He said, "Dad, I didn't." I said, "Dad, I didn't." I said, "I know." And I did know. That's the part that doesn't fit cleanly into a story about justice. My son is not a villain. He is a man who loved a woman who was not good for him, and he let that love make him careless with something precious. He will carry that for a long time. That is his consequence, and it is not a small one. I handed in the formal notice to vacate. 30 days. I had my attorney's number written at the bottom in case they had questions. He looked at it for a long time. Then he looked at me. He said, "Where will we go?" I said, "That's not something I'm able to answer for you anymore." They left in 3 weeks. My daughter-in-law did not speak to me again after that Tuesday. My son came and knocked on the basement door the morning they loaded the truck. He stood at the bottom of the stairs and I stood at the top. And he said he was sorry. He looked exactly like he was 9 years old. I don't know how fathers do it. How they hold the full weight of a person's whole life in their chest and still manage to say what needs to be said. I said, "I know you are. Go take care of yourself. Call me when you're ready." He nodded. He left. I stood in the kitchen of my house alone for the first time in over a year. The ceramic owl was still in my bedroom. I brought it back to the windowsill above the sink. I stood there with my coffee and looked at it for a while. I had the basement cleaned out and the guest room repainted. Blue and white again. I found the wallpaper that was close enough to Carol's that it made me smile instead of ache. The Sybil claim recovered about 60% of the value of what had been sold. Not everything. The Vermont lamp is gone. Some things you don't get back, and you make your peace with that. My son called me 11 weeks after he left. He'd found an apartment. He'd gotten a job. A real one. Not the intermittent freelance work he'd been doing for 2 years. He sounded steadier. He asked if he could come for dinner sometime. I said yes. Of course I said yes. He's my son. We ate at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd played him that recording, and we talked for 3 hours. Not about what happened, not yet. That will take more time. We talked about the bridge systems I'd worked on in the 90s. We talked about his mother. He cried a little, and I let him. I didn't say everything was fine because it wasn't entirely. But we were at the table together, and that counted for something. There's a thing Carol used to say when things were hard. She'd say, "You can't build on a cracked foundation. You have to go back to solid ground first." I'm 64 years old. I have a house I know every corner of, a son I'm learning to trust again, and a ceramic owl on my windowsill. That's solid ground. That's enough to build on. I've had a lot of time to sit with what happened. Not just with what she did, but with what I allowed, and for how long I allowed it. That's the part I keep coming back to. Because if there's anything honest I can say about this whole experience, it's that the situation didn't happen overnight. It was built slowly, one small surrender at a time, and I handed the materials over myself without fully realizing it. There's a version of this story where I'm the victim, and she's the villain, and my son is just a man caught in the middle. That version is clean and easy, and I don't entirely believe it. The truth is more uncomfortable. I chose patience when I should have chosen clarity. I told myself I was being generous, when really I was avoiding a hard conversation, and that avoidance had a cost, not just to me, but to my son, who needed someone to tell him the truth about what was happening inside his own marriage, long before a recording made it impossible to deny. What I know now is that patience without boundaries isn't a virtue. It looks like one from the outside. It feels like one when you're doing it. But there's a difference between choosing to be patient and simply refusing to act because acting feels too difficult. I confused the two for the better part of a year, and I paid for that confusion in concrete floors and the smell of a space heater and Carol's ceramic owl sitting in the drawer. The moment I called my attorney, not to threaten anyone, not out of anger, but just to understand clearly what my actual situation was. Something shifted in me. That's what I want anyone listening to understand. I didn't get my house back because I was clever or because I was lucky. I got it back because at a certain point I stopped waiting for the situation to correct itself, and I decided to understand it clearly and then act on what I knew. That's not revenge. That's just what it looks like when you finally respect yourself enough to take your own circumstances seriously. My son is a good man who made a serious mistake. He let someone redefine what was acceptable inside his own family, and he did it gradually enough that he couldn't see it happening until the recording played back in his own voice. I don't say that to shame him. I say it because I think a lot of people listening to this will recognize that process. The way love can make you slowly rearrange what you thought you believed. The cost of that rearrangement isn't always paid by the person doing the rearranging. Sometimes it lands on the people who loved them longest and asked for the least. He's rebuilding now. So am I. That's not a neat ending, but it's a real one. Carol used to say that the most important thing a person can do is stay honest about where they actually are before they try to figure out where they're going. She was right about most things. She was definitely right about that. The owl is back on the windowsill. The foundation is solid. That's where we start.